we will explain about the nature of learner language. The first is errors and error analysis. There are several reasons for focusing on error. The first is there are conspicuous, and the second is it is useful for teachers to know what errors that they make. And the last is paradoxically. It means that making error help the learner to learn. And this is the types of errors and error analysis. The first point is identifying the errors. It means that to identify errors, we have to compare the sentence learner projects. The second is describing error. There are several ways to describing errors. The one way to classify errors into grammatically categorized. And the third is explaining errors. The identification and description of errors are preparation to more interesting tasks of trying to explain why the learners occur. And the last is error evaluation. Errors analysis is to help learners a second language and need to evaluate errors. Some errors known as global errors. It means that the errors on the structure, and local errors is errors on using verb. So, from the types of errors and error analysis, there are four. The first is identifying errors, describing errors, explaining errors, and error evaluation. The first step, identifying errors. The teacher must identifying the errors what the sentence do by students or students say, and after that, describing the error. The student describe what he make errors in sentences or in speech. And the next is explaining errors. Here, students explain the errors, what they make errors in sentences, about in grammatically or in writing also. And then the last is error evaluation. It means the teacher must give evaluation also to make the sentences or the speech of the students to be well or good sentences or speech in grammatically or in structure about the that we said or that she write like that.
Developmental patterns. We have seen that many of the errors that second language learners make are universal. We can also explore the universality of second language acquisition by examining the developmental pattern learners follow. Number 1, the early stage of second language acquisition. There are 3 points. The first, silent period. They make no attempt to say anything to begin with. And the next, their speech is likely to manifest two particular characteristics, and the speech is proportional simplification. And then number two, the order of acquisition. To analyze the order of acquisition, researchers select a variety of grammatical constructs to research. And then number 3, sequence of acquisition. The acquisition of a common grammatical structure must therefore be seen as a process involving transitional construction. The last, some implication. Work on pattern of growth is important for another reason. It implies that linguistic features, especially grammatical ones, are inherently easier to learn than others.
Variability in learning language. We have seen that learner language is systematic. We have also shown that learning language is complex. At any stage of development, learners often use one form and sometimes another. The first is linguistic context. The main element in the linguistic context involves the introduction of another part of the statement. In one context, learners use one form while using alternative forms in other contexts. And the second is situational context. Learners are no different than native speakers. When native speakers of English are talking to friends, they tend to speak informally using colloquial expression. And the last is psycholinguistic context, whether learners have the opportunity to schedule their output. It is more likely to use target language forms when he has time to plan. And the conclusion, some learners in learning a language or second language, they are still have some errors. Some errors that made by learners can solve by each steps. There are identifying errors, describing errors, explaining errors, and errors evaluation. Developmental patterns, there are the early stage of second language acquisition, the order of acquisition, sequence of acquisition, and some implication. Variability in learning language, there are linguistic context, situational context, and psycholinguistic context. Okay, that's all from our group. Thank you very much, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.